Hey guys, Pods here, and today I want to talk about Dawn of War 3. Now, there's a lot of weird misinformation and general misconceptions surrounding the game that are just sort of floating around out there on the internet, so I want to talk about that a bit. I've played over 30 hours in the two closed beta weekends, so I know an alright amount about the game. Now, granted, 30 hours is not a massive amount of time, but, in the context of the beta weekends we've had access to, I'm probably on the more experienced end of things since, I've actually played the game an alright amount. Now, in regards to who this video was actually for, the primary group, I suppose, would be people who have been reading a lot of the weird shit that's just floating around on the internet and are not entirely sure what to make of it, and also people who've just generally been grossly misinformed as to what Dawn of War 3 actually is. The reason I kind of wanted to talk about this is, one of the reasons is it's really strange in the sense that, you Americans out there in the audience, there's this buzz topic that a lot of you like to talk about of late. It's the whole concept of fake news and whatnot, where these ridiculous, completely false, stories and whatnot are just circulated and repeated and parroted over and over again like they're truth until they become a truth. It really just sort of reminded me of that, except in a lot more lame and unimportant gaming context. So I just thought that was really weird. But anyway, as a secondary group, this video is also for people who either don't know what an RTS is, or who have somewhat understandably forgotten what an RTS is, given that we don't live in, the late 90s or early 2000s anymore when we were flooded by those titles. Also for people who don't know what a MOBA is somehow, or I guess who don't know what either are. Now, granted, if you don't know what either of the things are, hopefully you're not one of the people, parroting and perpetuating misinformation, because you're clearly not qualified to talk about it, but I digress. Also, my VOD is lagging in the background, so just don't mind that. It's just general gameplay. But anyway, this video is not necessarily for people who know better, who actually, know the game isn't a MOBA, but like to perpetuate this sort of bizarre Dawn of War 3 is a MOBA meme-like thing, because, recycling communal mimetic humor is the height of creativity and wit. Or necessarily for the creepy, fanatical space marine fetishists who like to fly into a rage when someone or something dares to offend their very narrow niche definition of angsty shades of blood red and gray grim darkiness, and who think the height of crime against nature is giving a large man in some armor the ability to jump. These people exist. I'm not being sarcastic. Anyway, I'll also be addressing some other points after the whole RTS versus MOBA thing, just sort of general misconceptions. But we're going to start off with that while my laggy, hopefully less laggy VODs in the background play out. So yeah, RTS versus MOBA bit, go. Alright, so let's start off with some key genre-defining features of RTS games. And for your convenience, I'm going to put them up on the screen in list format. 1. Base building. 2. Building a variety of units in said base, either in squad or as single units. 3. Controlling tons of units at once, any micro inherent in that whole process. 4. Tech trees, tiers, and or general upgrades via research at your base, typically via, a specific research building, but it can come in a variety of formats. 5. Resource gathering via capture points, resource nodes, or something similar near your base, and spread throughout the map to foster points of strategic interest and conflict, and, so on and so forth. 6. Single-player campaign involving all of these elements at varying points to varying degrees over the course of the game, sometimes, hopefully, with a diverse mission structure and changing mission objective types. Incidentally, I would like to point out at this point that Dawn of War 3 has all of these features, the hallmarks of RTS games. Now, of course, this is not going to be a 100% exhaustive list, and, there will be variants here and there within the genre, especially given genre blending, and really, strict, inflexible categorization is not always the most useful thing, but, I think any reasonable individual would agree that this is a decent set of iconic genre sort of defining features. All right, so moving on. Next, what are some of the key MOBA genre defining features? As nebulous as that genre kind of already is, I mean, what does that stand for again? Like multi-user online battle arena? Like that's pretty generic there. But anyway, getting into some typical MOBA features. 1. single or very limited number of units that you control. Sometimes there'll be like a pet class that controls a bear or a ghost or, something. Or there'll be a character that clones itself. There's a few of those in Dota 2. Dota 1, I guess. And there's even stuff like Lost Vikings, I guess, which are kind of, you control a whole 3 units. But anyway, the general rule of thumb is that you're limited to 1 or a small number of units compared to RTS games. 2, main hero unit that gains EXP levels and gets stronger over the course of a game. This exists actually incidentally in RTSs, but it doesn't actually exist in Dawn of War 3, and it's more so the province of MOBAs, typically. 3, regular line units, I guess for lack of a better term, that are controlled by the AI instead of the player, that move in these static patterns. So your creep waves, your minion waves, whatnot. 4, massive power increase via item purchases for the player character with gold or some similar form of currency. Most typically, this currency or resource is gained via killing minions, creeps, monsters, or just generally other heroes or getting neutral objectives. This can be replaced by other similar systems like, in Heroes of the Storm, where your character will unlock abilities by leveling up, but a similar sort of system, because, they gain stats as well. Next, number 5. Some kind of creeping or jungle or general neutral monster mechanic game where there's a whole kind of neutral objective thing going on. I don't know if all of them have it, but all the MOBAs that I can think of off the top of my head tend to have something similar, like in League of Legends, Dota, Dota 2, Smite, Heroes of the Storm, what's that one that people don't play anymore? Heroes of New Earth? Anyway. Next point. Number 6, pre-built non-customizable base protection pre-built non-customizable bases protected via pre-placed defensive structures. All right, so moving on. What of these features does Dawn of War 3 actually have in common with MOBAs that we talked about there? Incidentally, you'll notice this one isn't listed, but it's something that people will claim is one of the reasons that Dawn of War 3 is a MOBA. And that's that heroes and units, or most specifically people complain about heroes, the fact that heroes have abilities. This is absolutely, completely not the sole province of MOBAs. Both Dawn of War games, so Dawn of War 1 and 2, had both heroes and units with abilities. Way back in, when was Dawn of War 1 released again? Like 2004? And I'm sure that goes, in fact, I can guarantee that actually does go back further than that. Many RTS titles in general have had heroes with abilities. Warcraft 3 comes to mind, the game that essentially spawned the modern MOBA genre. Now, obviously, since Warcraft 3, and hence the RTS genre in general, was the direct genesis point of our modern understanding of MOBA games. And no, I don't want to get into StarCraft 1 and, Aeon of Strife and whatnot. I'm talking about our very kind of, what we see as modern MOBAs. They're going to share similarities. Warcraft 3 probably more so than any other RTS. Now, does that make Warcraft 3 a MOBA? No, of course not. That would be a completely absurd statement. Does it share traits with MOBA because it's the fucking source of MOBAs? Or a modern understanding of MOBAs? Yes, of course it's going to. So on that note, incidentally, Dawn of War 2 actually has a lot more similarities to MOBAs than Dawn of War 3 does. It has very limited base building. It has a small number of units you control. Upgrades on your hero character are done via gear. The hero levels and gets stronger over the course of the game. And there's a retreat button for any unit in the game, or any infantry unit in the game, which essentially serves as a less convenient recall function, which is, a function common in all, if not most, MOBA games. Like, we just press a recall button, and then it automatically goes back to the base. And so you don't get teleported back, but your guy slowly runs back and essentially becomes largely invulnerable to, like, he can't be CC'd and becomes largely invulnerable to ranged attacks. Now, does that make Dawn of War 2 a MOBA? No, of course not. It shares some similarities, but it's amusing to think that, people, when they like to go on about how much better Dawn of War 2 is compared to this MOBA trash Dawn of War 3, which one is actually closer to the MOBA? I can pretty much guarantee you it's not Dawn of War 3. Now, if you like Dawn of War 2 better than Dawn of War 3, sure, go for it. It's your personal preference. But don't get your shit mixed up where you're saying Dawn of War 3 is the MOBA and Dawn of War 2 isn't. So that gets to our point of what does Dawn of War 3 actually have in common with MOBAs that's not inherent to the RTS genre? Because again, as we just discussed, MOBAs come from RTSs, therefore they are going to have similarities whether you really want them to or not. Essentially, it really just boils down to one main point where you can say, okay, this probably comes from MOBAs, this is MOBA influenced. And this is the general map structure in multiplayer specifically, so not the single player, that contains the pre-placed defensive towers and shield generators. Now, this can lead to a somewhat more MOBA-like pacing and focusing of the gameplay around the map-based objectives, specifically the towers and the power generators. The power core, not so much. So the power core is like the main building that needs to be destroyed to end the game. That's essentially, it's pretty redundant structure. It essentially takes the place of an HQ in Destroy the HQ mode. And since it's already like placed inside your base anyway, if you could destroy a person's power core, you're probably capable of destroying, at the very least, their HQ. Probably their entire base in general. Now, you can lead to a few niche cases. I do remember there was one game where I was targeting the power core specifically, and I managed to blow it up with my last unit or something. But the thing is, I could have done the same thing to someone, to their HQ, in Destroy the HQ mode. So, I mean, calling Dawn of War 3 a MOBA because it has a power core which replaces your HQ as the objective you destroy, that's silly. Now, in terms of this whole slight changing of pacing and moderate MOBA influence in terms of the general focus of the game, or pacing of the game, I suppose is a better term for it, is this a terrible thing? I would personally argue no. When I first started playing in the closed beta, I was actually entirely indifferent to the whole thing. I was just kind of there, I ignored it, and I just sort of played RTS normally. And I was actually more so just kind of mystified why it even existed. But then, of course, as I played the game more, not of course, but anyways, I played the game more, I generally kind of started to find a greater appreciation and understanding for it. Just how generally it fit into the game, how to play around these objectives, and how it actually added some interesting and fun, battle dynamics, sort of defensive and offensive fights around towers and generators, because they are legitimate defensive sort of objectives to be played around. Also, by the way, a slight aside, when I talk about this, I'm talking about 1v1 mode. If you're talking about, for example, here in the background, you see the 3v3 mode. The defensive structures like the towers and the generators and whatnot, you're going to notice those a lot less since there's just so much more going on. It's a lot more chaotic and freeform and just shit's going on all over the place on the map. They're certainly still there, but you're going to feel their impact more so on the 1v1 mode where they're a bit more readily apparent and maps are a bit more confined. But, generally speaking, 1v1 maps are, well, they are going to be more confined in an RTS. Otherwise, it'd be just like a whole bunch of empty space. But anyway, getting back to the point of the whole pacing thing, your opinion of whether or not this is actually a good thing, that, of course, can vary. That's personal opinion. Maybe you much prefer the freeform, complete chaos and sort of greater unpredictability and the larger spikes of essentially downtime and non-action where you're not doing quite as much in the less structured gameplay modes that don't have like that power there, near the enemy base. Maybe you really, really like the 30-second rushdown strats, and you've done those in every single game you've ever played, and the base towers hinder that, and that just kind of pisses you off. Incidentally, I really love rushdown strats. I've typically kind of excelled at those. I remember, I don't remember too well, but way back when with Warcraft 3, like tower rush strats, which pissed people off. I remember that was considered a major cheese strat. What was the other thing? Like, building really quick commissars as Imperial Guard in Dawn of War 1 and sending them immediately into the enemy base, and just silly shit like that. But anyway, getting back to the point, you could certainly argue that all the presence of this stuff is, by your personal preference, worse. That's your right, certainly. But this one feature absolutely 100% does not make the game a MOBA. If you want to criticize a game, criticize it for the right reasons. Also, preferably after you've played the game as well, so you're not talking out of your ass. But, you know, probably the slightly more important point is that, you know, you're not criticizing the game for entirely incorrect reasons. It's just our fiction. Because, you know, if you're going to call the entire game a MOBA because this one thing, where in multiplayer, specifically, you know, more noticeably in the 1v1 mode, there are some base towers on the map, you may as well be calling the game a fighting game or something, because, you know, when you hit things, their hit point pool goes down, or it's a FPS because things shoot each other, or, I don't know, it's a SimCity clone because you can put buildings on the map. Or hell, it's a novel because, you know, there are characters and text and storyline. I don't know. Anyway, moving on to our next point.